So thank you all for being here this evening. And just we wanted to let you know that coming up, we're going to start doing a transition for the types of workshops that we offer, and to be more like practical and for like candidates and for the organizers and things like that. So to help you get out organizing letters to the editor and things. So we're going to start that transition. Also, in June, we're going to start going to one Monday a month because, well, in the summer, we did that last year because people are just busy in the summer. And then, but we're going to keep that up until the after the election, because, you know, people just want to, you know, be on the phones and things like that. And candidates want their volunteers to be on the phones or door knocking. And so the ones we have coming up, we've got, we have a date on this one on April 18th, where we have Senator John Marty will be joining us, Minnesota Senator John Marty, talking about healthcare made easy. And then we have Hobie will be joining us either April or May to talk about climate framing and how you can do messaging around that. And then we've got, and we haven't gotten dates on these yet, letters to the editors and other media interactions. And then one, this is really important if you can get your candidates there, candidate training, looking and sounding good on TV and other media. So that's what we've got coming up. And for tonight, before I turn it over to George, as you know, if you've been here before, just if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and George will stop periodically to ask if there are questions. So turn it over to you, George.
And we have a small enough group too, so it's okay if you want to, you know, just say it too. Okay, and I will. Yeah, as Lisa said, we're gonna transition a little bit, and again, it's mainly because the candidates get pretty jiggy if we decide to keep doing webinars on Monday nights when people could be phone banking. So we slow that down, but that's going to free up time for us to do some other things, and I'm hoping to do some short videos that people can use. The focus, it's not just that we're changing the number of webinars, we're changing the focus to be more practical, and also to really think this year of giving you more tools that you can use in your organizations. And we'll, you know, I took a stab at it here. We'll look at some of that tonight, but I want to do more of that and have more videos, and so things like that. And this is, you know, as organizer, all you guys have been doing this, and I think most of the people here have been on before. You know something about framing. You've learned a lot about it. Some of you I already know have become quite expert at it. It's been really cool to see. And but you know, our first time or occasional volunteers, it's going to be real unlikely that we're going to make them tremendously effective with training just before a door knock. Your regular volunteers and staffers may be somewhere in between. There are ways we can bring them up to speed on this. But what we can do, and this is kind of what I'm thinking with the things that I've worked on for tonight, is that we can immerse our volunteers in messaging from values. And so those volunteers that choose to stick around afterwards should be entering a culture in your organization where framing is heard and where leaders make it a priority. So I think that's pretty important. We're getting we're getting some more support around, you know, we have more people logging on here from around the country. Framing is taking, there are other people doing training. It's really starting to, you know, it's at the beginning, you're all early adopters, but it's starting to go. So that's good. So in an election cycle, from necessity, we have to be tactical in the messaging. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we shift away from strategic messaging. Instead, we have to integrate strategic messaging into our tactical messaging. And what I mean by that is strategic messaging is messaging, you know, I think that's where our message always carries a very core value. It always transmits that core value so that we're building that core value in people's heads that are gets tied to democratic policies. And tactical is, hey, you know, have you heard of my candidate? Are you going to go vote on Tuesday? Things like that. And that's a different kind of messaging. But I think we can begin to meld these things together. And I think there's something in it for everybody, and especially even the new volunteer, because that's where I started from, was looking at new volunteers and going, how in the world can they be effective with the scripts we hand them? I think every one of you who's been doing this a while, what's the first thing you do with the script? You kind of look at it real quick and go, okay, that's fine, out of here. You just go on with what you need to do. So maybe we can help them and ourselves. So I kind of thought of a number of questions that then I set about trying to answer. So the first one is, how can we do strategic framing during an election cycle where tactics are necessarily front and center? So it occurred to me that we have to realign our goals. And obviously electing candidates and passing ballot measures, we have to do that. That's what it's all about. That has to be the prime directive at this point, because if nobody's elected, then none of this matters. But we also have to add messaging to our priorities, not just by mentioning it, but by living it, making effective messaging noticeable and obvious to our candidates and volunteers. When they walk into our organizations, they should see these people are really into this messaging thing. It should be obvious to them. So what would be our strategic messaging goals? How can we, what kind of things do we want to say in this election cycle that aren't necessarily tied to a specific policy or a specific candidate, but that I think will work when we work them in with tactical messages? So I'm going to, my presentation program just kind of bailed out on me. So I'm going to go to the same program as a PDF. It's not going to be pretty, but there it is. So our strategic goals, I think obviously we talked about this 5 million times, root our messages and values. This is all about inviting voters or attracting them to our message, and making sure they know that this stuff comes from our moral values. We should stay in our core frames. I pulled 4 of the frames, or 3 of the frames that we've had in our list of frames. I pulled those out because I think they're very important for this particular election cycle. And empathy and nurturing, that's the core of what Democrats are. Empathy, yeah, we have empathy for everybody. People, maybe people who aren't doing well at the time for one reason or another, but the nurturing part, which means that nurturing is not, just what we do with our kids. It's also, it's okay if we all want to help everyone else out by doing things that benefit everybody, building roads, having public schools, and all the other things that we do, maybe giving people, like we used to pay for college pretty much. Some of the other dinosaur species that are on this call with us tonight remember when we went to college for not a whole lot of money. Yeah, maybe a quarter the price of a cheap used car, and now we just disinvested in that. But so that nurturing is important. That also goes to the protection and empowerment part. As citizens, we can empower ourselves, but note that protection and empowerment is what government is. That's the purpose of government in our eyes. In the Republicans' eyes, is simply protection, and a very limited form of that protection. Our protection extends not only to the military, but also extends to protecting each other. And the empowerment, like nurturing, same thing. But if you're ever stuck on trying to figure out how to talk about something the government does, it will fit into one, either protection or empowerment. And then public support for private success. And that's kind of the same thing, but we think it's okay if we do things that allow people and businesses to survive. We have a stronger business message than we ever talk about. We do a lot for business as the public. Okay, I spent a little time on that. I'll go back to the other ones. Paint Democrats as strong. This is really important. We have to constantly tout our current accomplishments as well as the past ones that we all rely on, like Social Security and unions and so forth. And right now, very important to be talking about President Biden and the success. I mean, the employment numbers are historically high. They're record high. There are all sorts of things that have gone right. We need to talk about those. We spend too much of our head time thinking about the GOP and what they're doing. Which brings us to the next one. Weaken the GOP worldview. the number one way to do that for us is to not repeat their messages. This is something that happens all the time. So I think that's really important as you're getting framing into your organization and volunteers are around saying, if you can remember to, don't repeat their messages. Don't talk about them so much, talk about us. The other thing is then to ascribe motivation to the GOP, that why they do what they do and why that's bad for all of us. We talked about this a few webinars back, and then we also talked about it when Ken Martin was on last time, and that we can't be, I'll go down to one of the other points here, throw punches. This is another goal we have, that we can't be afraid to do that. And we can't be afraid to be seen as being negative. I'm not saying that you need to do ad hoc attacks and be mean. I'm just saying it's important to talk about the truth with the GOP, because right now, this is the most dangerous situation that our country's been in since I was old enough to understand what politics was. And that's been a really long time. So, these are things we have to do. And then, not at last, but certainly not least, we have to make a goal of ours to give agency to voters. And what I mean by that, we can fix things together, but there are a lot of people feel hopeless and there's nothing to be done. And a lot of our messages are hopeless, especially, as Hobie knows, climate messages tend to be doom and gloom. And it's important that we give agency to voters, but also in the way that the Old People's Party had gotten into, which was the main way that the folks with the power and the money control everybody else is by dividing everyone else. So we have to say to people, we can have nice things. We can do things that we want to do. You and me, we can make this happen. Together, we can make this happen. We have the power to do that, and we need to do it now because some states are taking that power away. So these are strategic goals. I mean, not a one of these is really anything about a current issue, and certainly not anything about a specific candidate. I think if we can keep these things in our minds, I don't think that's incompatible with coming up with tactical messages or doing everyday door knocking and phone banking and even social media posting letters to the editor. So just some things to keep in mind. Does that make sense? Maybe I should stop there and ask. There's a question or two on that. Or was I clear? That happens. Denise, did you?
I have a question, George. When you say give agency to voters, can you say that again? Just clarify a little bit more.
Sure. What I mean by that is I don't know that there are many voters who think, there's really nothing we can really do about these big issues. I'm living my life. I can go vote. What am I really doing? Am I really changing anything? And I think it's really important for us to say, you know what, in a democracy, the only people who should be making these decisions are voters. I mean, yeah, we elect people and we send them there to do it. But if they don't do what we want, we throw them out. That's supposed to be the way it goes. So we have to, make sure the voters understand that they do have power and the vote is really important, especially now. And does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, it had totally. It's their vote is worth more than microchips right now.
maybe not to Tom, who's waiting for his car, but anyway, okay. That's were there any other questions on that? Does that make sense? I mean, keeping this in the back of our minds that these are things that we really want to do and we don't want to lose sight of as we get so specific on issues and we get so focused on our candidates, because if we forget these things, we're not helping ourselves. Okay.
Let me ask you about when you say stay on our core values, like when we talk about we're all in it together, the greater good matters. Yep. Would that be sort of included in your list, set of protection?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I pulled those out only because I think in some ways those were, and I even forgot the last one, which I threw in there, Democrats deliver. I think that's a frame. It's not a values frame as much as it is just a really powerful frame, but something along that line, show people what we're doing. But yeah, absolutely, Federico. The values we've talked about all along, absolutely, all of those matter. All of those are important.
Yeah, they all trigger the greater good frame, basically, in one way or another.
Yep, we all do better when we all do better.
Yep.
You know, that's the way. Okay, how do we make framing a part of our culture so everyone learns it? That's a question. And the conservatives do something that we don't, as a, you know, in the aggregate as Democrats. They have an imperative to pass on their worldview. They meet regularly, you know, in one form or another. It could be a church group, it could be, you know, a bean feed somewhere, but they discuss what they believe, and there's carefully engineered propaganda that is created for them, and that stuff gets passed around. And it's tied in with their identity and that particular culture so much that everybody in the culture knows it, whether they can really articulate it or not. They all know it, and we don't really do that. Part of it's a good thing because we're a big tent party, and we allow dissenting views and we have vigorous discussions. But at the core, I still believe no matter what faction you may be in the Democratic Party, you share the same core values. Those core values we've been talking about, they're out there for all of us. And so that's important. So we don't do it like the conservatives do. And so it doesn't occur to us that most Democrats have only a vague idea of what we stand for and cannot really articulate it to voters. And I believe that's because, unlike the Republicans, we just don't make it part of our culture to pass on our worldview in any explicit way. And when you think about it, a lot of what we do is respond to the Republicans, and that's really understandable because the Republicans now, they're not your grandfather's Republican. This is a pretty wacky crowd now, and they're doing some very, very dangerous things. So I certainly can see when they're doing something dangerous or crazy or out of control every single day, multiple times a day, it's, you know, pretty common that we're going to go, did you hear about what, you know, Madison Cawthorn did, or Lauren Boebert? Do you hear what she said today? That kind of thing. We more of our time spent not on that stuff. And so to do that, we should, let me get my here. I just click that. Okay, I use this program all the time. Where I'm, oh, there we go. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so to make it part of our culture, I think there are three things that we need to do. One is to prioritize. So what do we do when we get together and meet? What do we prioritize? We have maybe our Senate district meeting, our local district meeting once a month. And we approve agendas and minutes. We have officer reports. We talk about the Treasury. We talk about whatever upcoming conventions, things we have to do, maybe a fundraiser. We don't spend any time talking about messaging. Why is that? That's crazy. Why can't we consider time spent on messaging at least as deserving of our regular attention as all this other stuff that we find to be absolutely essential? So this really means to prioritize it and make framing a regular activity across the organization. And then organize. This is another area, and this is difficult for everybody. I'm sure it's difficult for the Republicans too, but is building our organizations. I know my Senate district, is anybody here from there? No. Okay, so I can say this. My Senate district is pretty much the same 14 people it's been for 20 years. The people who show up year after year after year. And we don't really do much in the way of organizing and retention of volunteers. And that's really important. So frankly, we can be the best messengers in the world, and it's not going to go anywhere if we don't organize. And the core of organizing is creating community. And that means including regular events where people are not going to always be asked to go out and door knock or phone bang or plant lawn signs. Have time when people can get together and talk with each other over a beer, over pizza, whatever. There's a person that I'm close to here where we're at, and she back in 2005. We had some training at Camp Wellstone together, and she went out and she created a group where they would meet once a month, and she'd bring in a speaker. And she ended up having at one time 12 different groups, and the speakers were just rotating around the groups. And every month you could go to one of these and sit down and have some pizza and talk with other Democrats and meet people. And that did so much to increase the numbers in the organization. In fact, it was the one biggest thing that brought people in, because people felt that they could meet other Democrats, but they weren't afraid that they were going to ask, immediately could ask for money, or immediately get asked to go out and door knock. It was in a way a safe place. Now, once they got to know everybody, then when you do the personal ask, will you come door knock this weekend? It gets a lot harder for them to say no. So just pointing that out. So anyway, the organized part is important. Keep that in mind too. How are we going to keep these people that are showing up? And we're going to be a lot of them. The people that show up that we don't see all the time are going to greatly outnumber the people that are our normal, regular volunteers. Okay, and the last one is teach eyes. So if we're going to prioritize and organize, we may as well teach eyes. And we need to model framing in our own communication. And as you're doing things, if you have the opportunity, explain to somebody why you made a message the way you did. Also make use of available online tools. We have a number of those at our website. There are a number of other organizations that we've talked about, and where there is training of this sort available. And so take advantage of that. And also later, I'll show you some things that I thought would be great to like tack up on the wall at the office or wherever, to just kind of saturate your organizing space with things about messaging, so people get that it's important. And another question, so can we actually build community by training people to frame? And so we've found that where a unit, usually we'd get a local unit or a state level unit that would get trained. We do a workshop for them, and they now have a common language. They all learned together. They had a common language about how to talk about messaging. We asked them to be open to checking each other and offering constructive help in the spirit of mutual learning. So not to get freaked out if somebody goes, maybe this, you might want to message that differently, as a collaboration. How are we going to help each other out? So that's important. But that just gets to be one more thing that bonds your community together. So you got your bean feeds, you got your, your no risk meetings. And if people are learning this stuff, now all of a sudden it just keeps people engaged. I think we've seen that in so many places. And some activities like letter to the editor writing, there's a lot of little clubs or little groups of people that get together and try to get letters to the editor in the paper. But writing postcards, that's now a big thing now. And if you've got a bunch of people sitting around who are never going to door knock, but they're just fine sitting there handwriting out postcards, give them messages that are well framed and let them write it 100 times. That message will sink in. Just a thought. And so there are a few other things that you'd be thinking. So that's something to think about, that this actually can be an organizing tactic, is learning together. Okay, another question. Strategic framing relies on really deep framing, core values, big ideas. How can we possibly get volunteers and candidates to do it? And that has always been the challenge. I think first we have to do the things we just talked about so that this concept isn't alien, that people come in and they see it happening. So, okay, this is part of what Democrats do. But next, I think it's important to go easy on people in a way. There's only so much a brand new volunteer is going to be able to absorb. And then we've talked about this before, but think about the moment of voter contact where the voter and the volunteer are just afraid at the beginning of this conversation that they're going to be caught not knowing something and that they're going to look stupid. And I think every one of us who's door knocked has been in that position. And it's not something that ever really goes away. At some point, somebody's going to ask you something and you're not going to know the answer and you're going to feel like a dope. I think the easiest way to reduce that anxiety is to have the volunteers, if they get stuck, just talk about right and wrong. So if there's an issue that's going on, what, can they talk about the good that comes from a good policy, or the things that hurt people from a bad policy? Talk about right and wrong. Now, at least that volunteer that's going out, they may still have that fear, but they have a backup plan, and one that's not going to take them 3 weeks to learn, or multiple sessions. Not everybody's going to get it, but some of them will. And it's worth saying that. And you can practice with them a little bit if you want, and that's not all that hard, but just ask them to, see what's right and wrong about everything. And that also puts the voter at ease too. Because if you're not asking the voter, well, did you know that 97% of climate scientists agree on whatever the hell they agree on, right? If you're not asking that question, now that person come back and you go, yeah, I can see why maybe that policy is not a good policy. Maybe we should do something different. And volunteers will also be relieved to hear that you expect them to keep it simple. You can tell voters to just, hey, if you don't really know what to do, ask what the voter cares most about. Let them talk a little bit. And then you can say, I hear your concern, here's how I see it. And then say why you care about the issue and how you see it. And put all of this as much as possible in terms of real people with stories. Now, these are lessons that take a while to learn, but mentioning them or having this kind of advice available to volunteers when they come in, and to all those volunteers, it's going to rub off on some of them. So there's that. And this other question, then I'll open up for questions again. How can we keep our new volunteers involved after the elections using framing? And this is kind of like what we talked about, but the whole idea that learning together can hold people together. And then once the election year is over, challenge your people to get right back on the horse and create letters to the editor. They're always or already doing social media posts, every day, all year. Some people 24/7, 365. And so get streams of resources to them or feed it to them. When you send out how many of us get these emails from the DNC, right? The email says something like, well, our leaders have done this great job. Look at this wonderful thing they did. Or look at how evil the Republicans are. And then the very next thing is give us $20. And and you think of I get, 10 of those a day. What if every one of them had some framing advice in it? Give me something I can use, for crying out loud. I'll give you some money. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. But if they're not going to do it, we can do it. If you're sending a message out to your organization, you can have something at the bottom in every one of these and throw something in there about framing. I've got some of those coming up, and there is more. This is just the first stab at it that you can use. So I'll stop again and ask, are there any questions or comments about that? What do you think?
I love that suggestion, George, that sending out a framing advice. We should do that, as a group.
Yeah, saturate it, make it so everybody, whenever they see anything from you, there's something, maybe just a little thing, but something that talks about how to message better. Why not? It make me happier. I might actually fork over some cash to the DNC one of these days if they were to actually do that. All of us, I know, we all get hit up by a lot of candidates. There's only so much giving we can do. But anyway.
Carrie has a question.
Carrie. Where'd she go? There she is.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on when you mentioned the culture that Republicans have, and it's oftentimes mixed with propaganda and they feel compelled to pass it down through the generations. So my thoughts on building our culture of Dems, the freedom to think independently, the freedom to be yourself, the freedom to change your mind and learn new things. I just thought that would be I think that really speaks to who we are as people when I think of the interactions and that I have. And I also think that this doesn't really open us up for attacks. And I was wondering your thoughts on that.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. I think that's wonderful. In fact, would you throw that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll type it in there, and I'm thinking about maybe writing it on a note card, like you just said, just so I remember that and start talking about that to my volunteers. I need something to say as I get them. So thank you.
You bet. No, thanks. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to be doing. And what I like about what you did is that you're really getting at the core of who Democrats are. And that's what we want people to know. We want to, what they're hearing is something different, because they're hearing it from the Republicans, and they're hearing it from the media, who just seems to, for some reason, still parrot talking points and terms and phrases from the Republicans. So yeah, excellent.
Peter and Patty have a question.
Thanks. The thing that occurred to me is, I mean, we've been working towards this anyway, but it's just like, if we're talking about messaging, then we need to be planful about sending messages, not just waiting for the opportunity. And, for example, as we're trying to wade through redistricting here, once we get that done, part of what we've been talking about is getting better at getting out at least a monthly newsletter for our district, for all the members, and to be able to choose some messages that are getting spread across more than just one district, but certainly to our district. But the idea that we pick messages and get them out there, get messaging on the agenda at our meetings. As one of the items. What's one or two good messages like the one we just heard? How do we just get these out so that people keep hearing them? And you hear about the echo chamber, but I think we're an awful long ways away from that yet. But I think if we can start getting some of these things echoing out, people will hear them more, and it becomes more spontaneous, because you've heard it here, you've heard it there. Now you've got a frame to get out there. So I think the more we can share these ideas, the better.
Yep. And doing it locally, like that's where all great ideas in our party come from, is local, from what I've seen. And that's a way to do it. Luckily, we are, I was talking to Antonia Scatton tonight, actually, and she's not here, but she in Washington, D.C., and now she's in Arizona. She does the training like we do. And she's been shut down in both places by the consultants. She tried to do some messaging stuff at the party level. And a lot of the Democratic state parties are not into it. DNC seems to not really have much interest at all. And Scott Witkoff over in Wisconsin and Illinois, who does this, he was doing this way before I was. And he was shut down in Wisconsin by the same consultants who have been doing the same thing every 2 years and expecting different results. And they get paid huge bucks for it. We're really lucky in Minnesota and in Washington. I don't know if there's any of our Washington state people here, but in Minnesota and Washington, the state party chairs are into it, and they are promoting it and actually spending some bucks on it. So that's a good thing. Any other comments? Let me,
George,
yeah,
I had one, which is the subject of messaging is interesting to me, but it might not be interesting to other people. So the first frame we have to construct is around how we can use this. What are the results from using this? And often, sometimes it's pointing out how we're getting our ears boxed by conservatives.
yeah.
And so, anyway, it's like our discussion we had today about the difference between training and workshops.
Right.
It's the difference between understanding how, but the actual activity of constructing what. So I like the idea of sending out, here's a frame on this particular subject.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and the other thing is giving the volunteers and frankly, the candidates and the staffers the agency. So what this is this is a way to fight back. So you showed up here to volunteer because you care about these things, right? Well, you know what? Here's another way. Here's a way that you can really do something about it. Get this messaging thing, see what we're doing here. And now this is a tool. This enables you to do the best fighting back that you can. So, all right. All right then.
Hey, George.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So no, about that, what Antonia said, basically, I mean, people like us who want to, to take democratic speak to, the next level, we're fighting a two front war, right? I mean, when on our back with democratic consultants, and then so it's the best approach to use the the frame of basically the message of, will you either believe in science or not, so in other words, we're fighting science denial among our own people. Is that a good way to approach that? Or I wonder if maybe we should dedicate the whole webinar on discussing, how do you sell advanced communication to our own people,
Yeah, it's a big question, and I agree with you. I think it's important to do for whatever it's worth. For the first time, I think I've seen some cracks and people starting to get it, and there are more groups doing this. But yeah, I mean, we have to think about that. We have to look at ways we can push this up the ladder a little bit. It would be, I think one of the fastest methods for that is to train our candidates, because candidates have the microphone, right? They have the bully pulpit, at least in their own ponds. But they're also meeting with people from around the state. And the more candidates we get involved in learning this, the better off we are. And I've found that the candidates who are the most receptive to it tend to be the new candidates. And
right.
I think it's because they have so little coming to them in the way of resources that they're glad to get anything.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody who's never run before is starting, they have to get volunteers. They have to get to know party people. They've got to get access to the van. They have to fundraise, and they have to do most of this stuff on their own. And so if we come along and there's some free training and they can do it, now we catch them early. Then when they run for president, they actually know this stuff, That's what I'm thinking. So that's a great way to do it. And I think we do the same thing with our leaders within the party. The people who, all of us know the young person that we see who comes into the organization, who is just gung-ho and you think might stick around for a while. And people just lavish attention on this person and make sure they have what they need. Those people need to be on board with this too. And if you have, like in Minnesota, we have Minnesota Young DFL. Those are folks that we've talked to our chair about getting in front of those folks too. Young people, they're hard to pin down, of course, because they are starting lives and they tend to move and you can't always keep them. But that's fine. If we're teaching them here and they move some other place, people are teaching them there. All right, there we go. All right, I'm going to move to these here, some of these here. I'll just go through these and not in super depth, but what I thought about is I remembered better times when we could actually, when we'd have offices that people would go to pick up their walk sheets, and we could talk with each other in person. And I imagine what could get thrown up on the wall, on the various walls that has to do with messaging that you could just print out on a piece of paper. I'm not saying these are perfect, but these are just some ideas. So one would be, this is the biggest challenge I find for people who learn framing. And unfortunately, the more well-versed you are in topics or the more educated you are, the harder it is to put the facts and the reason aside. So get off the facts and reason train. Yeah, people should consider this and reason to the conclusion. Ain't going to happen. Make a values-based message. In other words, tell them why you care. Okay, throw that up on the wall. But we got to get people off that thing that many of us do, get too technical. This we've talked about before. If people are having a hard time getting to what their values are and getting to a message that includes people, toddler logic, ask yourself why you care about this issue, create a new message. Then ask yourself, well, why do I care about that? And then repeat those steps until your message finally shows up with, well, you know what? I just don't want people to be out on the streets living in cardboard boxes because I care about them. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. These are we talked about these before, but values, priorities. I just threw these in because I think for this cycle, it's a good thing. And I think this last one, especially, Democrats deliver. Find out what our successes are and talk about them locally, nationally, whatever. That's important. And I'll make this all available. I'll just send you, you can all get the PowerPoint. This is something that is important, and this is a good one to throw up. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Stay out of our opponents' frames. Don't repeat their messages, even to debug them. The famous example of the group that sent something out and said, here's what our opposition says in big, bold letters. And then the reasons why it's not true underneath it in regular type, one after another, just educating people as to what things they are that they should do, or what your opponent's messages are. And some of these I pulled out of Lakoff's little blue book, but this is one: use your own language, not your opponent's. Never repeat messages, code words, or dog whistles that your opponent uses. Be aware of what you believe. This is really important. I can't stress this enough. People who are Democrats need to know why we are Democrats. And it's a vague notion many people have. So be authentic and proud of your beliefs. Repeat them out loud over and over. On the other hand, never repeat ideas you don't believe in, even if you are arguing against them. And that's another Lakoff one, to really say, learn who we are. And I kind of imagine these like those really sappy posters that you see at work that, whatever, they'll have a word and then they've got a nice forest scene behind it. Maybe this is another way to do it. Be positive. Talk about the good things Democrats bring us all. Talk about the presidents and the Democratic Congress's truly astounding achievements. In the face of opposition that is as nasty as it's been since the Civil War, we actually are getting stuff done. Bring it home. Lakoff says, bring it home. Tell real stories about real people every time you can. And if you're a candidate, make absolutely sure that this is a story that you heard from the person or someone involved in the story, because in that way you will always sound authentic, because it will be true and real. No pink Cadillac kind of stuff that Reagan did. None of that. Another thing that Lakoff, and I don't know how many of you have read more than, Lakoff's main book, Don't Think of an Elephant, maybe one other. Words are everything, and it's absolutely fascinating stuff. He's done so much on metaphors and on words, what words mean, how they work in the brain. And he says, say it simply, avoid generalities. So really, really big, abstract things that are hard for people to get in touch with, and avoid jargon and statistics, endless facts, charts, graphs, and even your flawless and eloquent reasoning. That, yes, you're brilliant and people aren't going to fall asleep. Don't take the bait and pivot. This is great for candidates, but for everybody. Remember this: you are under no obligation to answer a question, especially if that question is from your opponent. You don't have to answer the question. They can just accuse you of all sorts of crazy stuff, and you can kind of just look at them and roll your eyes and go on with what you were going to say anyway. Answer the questions you think should have been asked and return to our core values and the policies that come from it. We go over some of this in the candidate training too. It's coming up. Put people at ease. You don't need to know everything about your candidate or every policy. Open a conversation about right and wrong. And before I get to that, there's things like that. I'd like to find more of these. I think we add carries onto this too, and have another one. And maybe I can do that before if you're okay with that, Carrie, I'll do that before I send the PDF out to everybody. And if there are more of these, collect them. As you come up with them, write them down, and then just throw them at the bottom of an email or somewhere in your email. So we're at 7:52. I can also go over, I realize there are a number of sandwiches out there. We've talked about sandwich communication before. And if you want, I don't know if people have to leave. I can get probably another 5 minutes and go over those and then open up for questions. Is that cool? Hearing no objections, we shall move on. I'm throwing a lot out here tonight, but what the heck? So I got to thinking about sandwiches because it just seems like there's so many of them. The original is George Lakoff's Truth Sandwich. And this is, so the sandwich has got a bun on either end and something in the middle. This is also known as the bologna sandwich, and Michael Shermer calls it that. And you state the truth, and Lakoff points out that the first to frame gets the advantage. So it is possible, Tom, on that limousine liberal thing, that if we were to talk about limousine Republicans and were loud and vocal and repeated it all the time before they got that message out, or even as it was, then we're fighting for that. That can be very dangerous, but it was, not impossible. But this is the basic sandwich. State the truth, indicate the lie without repeating your opponent's words. And I do know that baloney is spelled differently. And then at the end, return to the truth, always repeat truths and not lies. The next sandwich, this is my sandwich, which is basically very similar based on that. Uncover the real issue and state its truth. I throw that in there because a lot of times what the Republicans have everybody talking about is a distraction from what the real issue is. So always be looking for what's really going on behind the scenes and uncover that issue and state its truth. Then indicate the lie as a distraction from that truth. Avoid repeating your opponent's specific language and stay out of their frame and return to the truth. I'm going to give Hobie a shout out on Hobie's value sandwich. I summarize this. If I'm wrong on this, Hobie, correct me. But basically, the format is state our values, name a universal value that includes the race class. I call it a prefix. No matter who you are, no matter where you were born, we are all in this together kind of thing, which we'll talk about that in a minute. And then identify the violation of those values and who is violating them. Identify the who, what, and why. And then state our vision and solution. And then at the end, put the bottom bun on, top bun, return to our values, and add a call to action. So another sandwich. I think this is kind of weird that there's these sandwich things out there. This I call the populist sandwich, but this is really what you're hearing from the race class narrative, but it's also what the old populist party used to do when they focused on the fact that there was division everywhere. And so out of the what are they calling this? The Independent Strategic Research Collaborative, I think is their name now. It was the ASO Communications Voting Rights Lab and those folks. And this is across a few slides here. But the bun, the top bun is no matter who you are, where you live, what color you are, or how much money you make, or whatever other language that joins people together and erases divisions, we all want, and fill in the blank. So this is what I'm calling a prefix. We're going to stick this on the beginning of any other kind of message. Then the ingredients that can go in this sandwich, and I pulled these out of a number of the movement briefings that this group has done. Name the villain and the violations of values. I'm paraphrasing what they have, but that's what's in there. Ascribe motivations to the violations and or the lies. This is the throwing a punch. The Republicans want to take your voting rights away. I mean, that's exactly what they're actually doing. So you're not lying about anything. And so that can be said. You have to be a little careful with that, but you can make it happen. But as Ken Martin said last week, don't be afraid to throw a punch. Name the deliberate the deliberate division as a weapon that harms us all. I think it's important to make people aware that this is the tool. This is the probably the primary tool of people who are trying to grab power, is dividing people against each other. And the classic example of that is in the South, where especially where the white folks in power said they needed to divide the poor white folks from the black people, in which case now you've got, so it's usually stated as, well, at least you're not black. And that's how they divided people. And if you haven't read Heather McGee's The Sum of Us All, I know Tom's read that, a few of you had, absolutely phenomenal book that just, you'll walk out of there absolutely, it will prove to you that all of this stuff, all this racist crap that we've got in our country really hurts everybody. I mean, and she just goes through, it's great. So anyway, that division, call it out for the trick that it is and say, we refuse to be divided. We're going to work together to solve these problems. You can also throw in agencies, emphasize unity and collective action to solve problems, saying that joining together will achieve the desired result. In effect, we've taken the power back. Agency is who gets that, who gets to decide that. We get to decide that. It's a democracy, at least for a few months longer anyway. Sorry. And then throw in a call to action or name your demand if that's appropriate. Then the other bun is a suffix. You return to shared values, state the positive outcome, and again, give voters agency to fix things. And that agency to fix things, bringing it back, that again can also be added to any other message that we have out there. So I kind of like that idea where this one really, this way of looking at it really melds the strategic and the tactical and the specific. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I'll make all of these available and use them as you will. That's fine.
George, it's Hobie. There's one other thing that I think I like about the last one that I didn't see up there, and that is if we cite how we've succeeded in the past, then we overcome the cynicism of, oh my gosh, we'll never be able to do it. Yeah. We got the right to vote. We got the right to do, this. We developed the 40-hour work week, whatever subject you're talking about, to prove that, and then ask, and now it's time to do, and raising the bar for the next ask. So you take away a little bit of that cynicism, because sometimes people go, there's no way we can do this.
That is really cool. That is perfect, because yeah, I mean, it's beyond agency. It's hope. It's proof that these are things we can do because we've done them before.
As Anat would say, yes, we can, because yes, we did.
Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
George, tagging on to what Lisa and Hobie said, and that's why Anat Shenker-Osorio's podcast is so good, because she just focuses on victories where language, took a big role. And so it's great podcast to listen to if you have an iPhone.
Yeah, I was talking with Antonio Scatton about that today, and there's and as you know, I've brought other people on because I think it's important for you to see how other people do this, because the more angles we get on this, the more we understand. And I think we were talking about the ASO's stuff, not Shenker-Osario's stuff that she does. And what's great about those is you do get the historical, you got Michael Potterez and these other folks who give some history. They give you the context of what's going on. They talk about the issue very clearly, and then they provide a good sample of a message in both a full treatment and then a shorter version. So you have it. And that's different, you know, in Tony and I and Michelle Pallas in Michigan, who we had on before, we are teaching people how to do this themselves. And in a way that's also happening in the Not Shanker series, but we're going a little farther back and letting people have that knowledge about psychology and why people think the way they do, so that you've got that background. And having all of these different ways to do it, I think is great. You know, if you haven't gone to what they're calling movement briefings, I think we've had a link to it before. Maybe we can do that, Lisa, for our follow-up letter. We'll get a link to it. They're worth it. They do it every week, every couple of weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, and they're usually during the daytime, but they'll, you know, if you sign up, they'll also send you all the follow-up stuff. And you have to ask for the video link, but if you ask for it, they'll give it to you and you can watch it. And the video is pretty good because there are a lot of good questions and a lot of off-the-cuff talking that goes on too. So, and I know we've hit 8 o'clock. If you have to leave, that's great. But as usual, we'll stick for a little bit more if people want to yap. That's cool. Hi, Ron. And
so, George, if you got a second.
yeah.
I was going back, I was looking for the email I sent out here a while back about, I was thinking about, you know, in a sense, the values, but I like to use the word anchor points. And I came up with my list, which I ended up writing a letter to the editor about. And the first one is my grandkids and the future of our next generation going forward. That's a huge anchor point or a huge value for all of us.
Yep.
I think we can all hang our hat on that. We all have families. We want to make sure that they can succeed. And the fact that the decisions that we make today can really affect what decisions will be able to be made in the future.
Yep.
And the second one I like to work on is working families. I mean, working families are what built this country. And I think it's an important point or value that we really go after that, because that's really what makes up the Democratic Party, is the working family.
Yep.
And the last one is the freedom to vote and having our vote count. And I think those 3 anchor points, when you start talking about those values or anchor points, any conversation you come up with, you can kind of relate back to those things.
I think you're right. Yeah. And what I like about the grandchildren is there's that nice method of the future projection. So basically taking, all our messages are generally in the present time frame, and pulling them out of that and projecting into the future what things could be like if we adopted a good policy, or if we didn't do the good policy, or worse, if we did a bad policy, and projecting that out. But you can go, and if you're really good at it, you go forward and back in time. So we can protect our grandchildren just like our grandparents protected us by having the New Deal or whatever. I like that.
Yeah.
Hey, George, I wonder if it would be good to remind folks that we have this listserv, this email list that people we can collaborate there.
Yeah, I want to do that. I'm still working out the bugs to get it up and running. I actually had to abandon the way we were doing it with Google, and had to install some software on a server. So I don't have that figured out yet. Once I do, though, we will. What Federico's talking about, and you guys are people who've been around for a while, we're looking for what we want to do is set up a listserv / forum. That's why it's hard. I'm making it a little more technical than usual. And the idea is that people who've learned, like, we've had people on these webinars and people who've come to our training. I know Patty and Peter and I go back to the very beginnings of Connections Lab, and Ron Wax also. And so where was I going with this? What was I just saying?
The listserv.
The listserv. So the idea is that what we would do is, now that most of you have done so well, all of you have learned an awful lot and do well at this as it is. What we want to do is pick a message. We'll have projects, and the project will be to pick a message and really frame it well and get it out there and do it in a way that we can identify the message down the road. So that means putting in maybe a unique word that other people are unlikely to use. And then and put hashtags in there also that are unique so that we can track the messages and see. And so if it gets retweeted and it goes, and all of a sudden we hear Joe Biden and he starts talking about something, out comes our word and our message, maybe we know we've gotten it someplace. This kind of started as this issue. A question I get asked all the time is, well, how come you're not doing focus groups on this? And it's like, yeah, I'd love to do focus groups. You got to spare, $100K and go out and do focus for groups all the time. That'd be great, but until that point, we have to do something else. And Antonia came up with this idea, and I just thought it was a neat way to go out there and at least track where the messages go. And the concept would also be that everybody who's participating, once the message would be agreed upon, would then the very next day go out and send it out through all of their social media vectors just to see what happened. We don't know where that would go, but I think it would also be fun because unlike a webinar, it's more of a collaborative. We get together, we work together on it. And there are so many smart people out there in the world and so many, people who've gotten rather adept at this. So that's what he's talking about. As soon as I get the technical bugs worked out, we'll let you all know about it.
Hey, George?
Yeah.
Is this just the general discussion section then?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was, I don't know if you saw I think it was in the Washington Post. There was an article on judicial philosophy as code words for the Jackson nomination. I've just put that aside. But the other one that I saw that I didn't see anybody discussing was World War III.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, I've started to hear it over and over again, and I'm wondering who's benefiting from this and why we are jumping all the way from a war in Ukraine to World War III. I just don't know that it's very useful as a real term to describe what potential scenarios are, but I kind of ask myself, how does it make me feel? Well, I feel afraid as a result of that term. Then I go to, well, who benefits from me being afraid? Or is it that Democrats aren't strong enough to prevent World War III or whatever it is? But I just was curious about your thoughts or anybody's here as to, is it a frame or is it, is there someone that might benefit from it that I'm missing here?
I'll let somebody else, if anybody has an idea.
Well, I've heard it on the news. I haven't really heard it from politicians.
Joe Biden said it.
Joe
Oh,
Biden has said it,
okay.
yeah.
All right. I apologize for that then. But I've heard it several
It's not
times.
your
on
fault.
the news, and I think, so what does the news benefit? I mean, the news, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, maybe it
I think
benefits the
that's-
news media more than anybody else.
I also have to wonder in the context of like Joe Biden saying it is because what we're seeing in Ukraine is, is horrible. And so people naturally want to do something about it. And things like no-fly zones and those types of words don't mean a lot to the average person without a lot of explanation of what that actually means. And so saying something like, well, it would start World War III just scares people enough to say, okay, so what we're doing is enough right now, or the sanctions are enough, or us giving them weapons is enough, because if we do more, we could have World War III. And that's just so scary that people go, oh, well, we don't want to have World War III. Or now they're also saying things like, the nuclear bombs will start coming out.
Right.
And that's, even more scary. So I don't know if it's a way of just like saying to the people who are watching, saying, yeah, we're doing as much as we possibly can, because if we do much more, this horrible, horrible thing is going to happen.
Biden might be trying to get out ahead, just like he did before Putin attacked, by giving, he might be, just saying what Putin's got on his mind, or what Putin is threatening, so that it minimizes Putin. I mean, I don't know, it's kind of distorted, but he might be trying that tactic just like he did before the attack started.
That could very well be.
I don't know what it's going to get us in the long run by using that. It might just be more cooperation among other nations, and the willingness to continue to support Ukraine.
It could be posturing on Biden's part too, sending a message back to Putin saying, don't go too far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think between what Patty said and Tom said makes some sense, that in effect it's if this thing escalates, because that's what they're worried about. If it escalates, the stakes could be World War III, and they want to pin it on, they want to make sure everybody knows it's Putin's fault. My own personal feeling on the term is that I think the term came about like defund the police, and even democratic socialist, which came because somebody asked Bernie to describe his way of looking at it. He said, well, I'm kind of a democratic socialist. And then all of a sudden, now it's a big thing and everybody's talking about it. But they came about organically. I don't think I'm thinking there wasn't a lot of thought behind this, that there wasn't, a meeting saying, okay, should we say World War III or not? I think somebody said, well, geez, if we go into Ukraine and we meet Russians right together, face to face, well, that could be World War III. And all of a sudden, World War III, the media, like you say, it's going to pick it up and they're going to run with it because it's scary and headline grabbing. And it's an easy thing to remember. And it's one of those that I worry about, that when these things come about organically like this and take off, they don't always help us.
You may be right. I was just intellectually curious about the power of that set of words in terms of triggers of emotions, possibilities, and then trying to ascribe some motive to it, which you're right, George. It might have just been, let's throw something out,
But it's still out there.
Let's give Putin a signal. But that shows you how powerful a simple term can be in shaping events.
Yep.
I
Look at defund the police here in Minneapolis. That was from what I've read, that was the reason that the whole restructuring of the police department failed, because of the term. And if that hadn't been used, and the more imaginative term had been used to describe what it really is, it might have passed. I don't know the truth of it. I try to stay as far away from Minneapolis politics as I can.
I mean, you can't. Go ahead,
Patty.
I was going to say, I do think, going back to the war terminology, I do think that one thing that Biden is truly trying to get ahead of is the chemical and biological weapons. Yeah. And by naming those things and saying, Putin is has been known to do that in the past, perhaps that can deter some of that in Ukraine. But I think he might be trying to get out ahead with that terminology.
I think you're right, and like Lakoff says, he who frames first wins, and there is that. I think so far they've done a rather masterful job of being out ahead of Putin, and of course the Republicans. It's so easy to be a Republican nowadays. If you're going to message, all you have to do is whatever the Democrats are doing, whatever Joe Biden's doing, whatever Nancy Pelosi's doing, doesn't matter if they're like saving puppies, from certain disaster. It's wrong. And that's just easy. That's what they're doing. But, you
Yeah,
know,
they-
there's a lot to talk about that have been done. It's been really good. Phil, you had a,
Just it occurs to me that the GOP weaponizes everything. I mean, Let's Go Brandon was going to be just a wonderful rallying cry. They knew that and they weaponized it. And that's what the GOP does, is they weaponize every possible frame that they can.
it's, you know, there's a great series, and I think it's a series. It's probably 3 or 4 episodes. It was on HBO. It's about Roger Stone. Lisa, what was that called? Get Me Roger Stone.
Get me
I think.
Roger Stone, yeah.
Get Me Roger Stone. It's a great dive into the history of that kind of strategy, and the whole attack, deny. And there's one more that I always forget. But it's absolutely fascinating to be watching this guy, Roger Stone, who's just a full-on sociopath. The guy is like he's even has a whole costume that goes with it. He's got Richard Nixon tattooed on his back, the face of Richard Nixon on his back. But you just look at this human being and you go, how in the world can somebody who uses those tactics, you know, how can someone be that evil? That's so underhanded. And it works. And anyway, great documentary to watch. It really opened my eyes up a lot about who Roy Cohen was and what that whole method was, that you just, you know, you see it with Trump. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Just attack your opponent all the time. Don't ever let up. And this is part of Newt Gingrich and Mitch McConnell's deal, where they just, no matter what, it doesn't even matter if it's their idea, they're going to be against it if a Democrat says it.
I
I would
think
Like
that
Obama.
show was on PBS. So if you have Passport, I think you can go listen to it again or watch it.
Oh, it was on PBS? Okay.
I believe it was.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It was
And
a
who
while
knows,
ago
these
we
things
watched it.
travel.
You know, I keep wondering to myself, if we would have had a different president when Putin was bombing the hell out of Syria, if there would have been a different reaction going on also.
Maybe. Yeah. I know having lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, I know that this stuff is scary, you know, and as a kid, I lived in New York. We were 18 miles from Manhattan. So we were in the blast zone for, you know, the full-on nuclear attack on New York. And we would go in, you know, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, all our training went out the window. They hauled us across the street and put us in the basement of a church all day. And, you know, so that kind of stuff, it's scary. World War III as a term is pretty darn scary. But
Yeah, everybody has a personal image of what that would look like.
Mhm.
yeah. Well,
Hey,
on that note,
Hey, George, just a quick thought. There's good work on state revenue by We Make the Future, the group that's called We Make the Future, that really interesting stuff on state revenue and talking about that.
okay. Great.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everybody. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that thanks everybody for coming, and we will get out as soon as we have our schedule lined up for the next 2 months. We'll get that out to everybody so you can join us again.
And keep your eye out for the ones that, yeah, they're for you, but you should use them in your organization. So start thinking about candidates. We'll have this candidate training coming up within 2 to 4 weeks, somewhere in there. And so start thinking about that, get your candidates' names and tell them, look, you really need to go to this one. And this one's on looking good, sounding good on TV. Most candidates don't know how to do that, but that's the first of what we'll do for candidates and others. So, you know, anyway, that's that. So
Okay.
good night, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
connectionslab.org.